All right, everyone. I believe that I am live. We'll see. One of these days, I'll figure this out and jump right into things. So, welcome to my government shutdown live streams. I am Josh Heath. I am a game designer based in the DC metro region. Today, last time I talked about my mechanics for about an hour. Today, my plan is to talk about the latest game that I've created called May I Enter, a vampire game. I created this with designer Alison Cybe, based in the UK, and I'm going to primarily talk about that game. So you should be able to see on the screen, as long as I've done this correctly, and I believe I have, you should be able to see our layout in Adobe InDesign. Now, I do layout in Adobe InDesign, not because I love it, not at all. I do so because I'm used to it, right? There are a lot of amazing layout design programs out there. Honestly, there are two that people tend to use the most of that I know of. InDesign is one of them, and the other one is, you think before I said it, I would have known Affinity. Affinity Publisher is the other layout design program that people tend to use. So, if you are a game creator, right, and you are looking to take your book from manuscript form to put it into a design program, InDesign or Affinity Publisher are the two that I would recommend because they're the most used by most people for reasons, right? They're fairly intuitive, fairly easy to use, and as you dive into them, lots of things you can learn. So I'm noticing that the live chat is there on the screen for people to see. Hopefully that's not annoying to you as we go through this. If it is, I'll figure out a new place to put that in the future. But I need to be able to see it in case there happens to be someone who will join us today live. And if there isn't anyone that joins us live, hopefully someone down the road will watch this and enjoy this and gain something from it. So anyway, so I'm talking about May I Enter, a vampire game. May I Enter as a game came about because I had years of experience playing, running, LARPing Vampire the Masquerade, largely. I've been a vampire movie genre fan forever. I enjoy a lot of vampire media. I really enjoyed Sinner's Right. I loved the new Nosferatu. I love the original Nosferatu, Lost Boys, etc., Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I could go on. It's definitely a genre that I've always been interested in. But I had a big, major concern, right? For me, it became uncomfortable that vampires were effectively could be construed to be assaulting people to feed, right? And if you are playing vampires as a character concept, I was struggling to square that with my enjoyment of playing those games. It often feeding, right? Feeding from people in my Vampire the Masquerade games kind of happened off screen. And that seemed to reduce the, I'm not sure what the right word would be, but it certainly didn't feel like we were fitting the genre right by playing it that way. So I was thinking about vampires one day. I was thinking about playing vampires as a player, and I asked myself, well, what if vampires need to be invited? And as we all know, right, vampire myth has vampires need to be invited to enter someone's home. But I was wondering, what if vampires needed consent? What if they needed to be invited to feed? What if they needed to be invited to feed? What if they needed to be given permission to use their powers? What would be different about vampires if they were an active consent-based monster creature, right? They had to have this active, engaged consent to feed, to be, to exist as vampires. What would that be like? And I sat with it for a while. I wrote kind of a long intro maybe 600, 700 words, just getting the idea out of my head, and I put it on Facebook and I let it sit. But it percolated in the back of my brain for about 2 years, and then I wanted to work on it, but I knew I wasn't going to have enough time and energy because of everything going on. Clearly, I'm doing these during government shutdown. I'm a government employee, right? And I was thinking about this idea still, thinking about vampires and this concept and how you would game as vampires in this greater oeuvre, in this existence, right? And Alison Cybe mentioned that they were looking for work, and I had read lots of their work in Star Trek Adventures, in Shield Maidens, and a few other games, Fallout, that they had worked on, right? And I was like, oh, it would be really interesting to work with Alison, right? So I reached out and said, hey, I've got 2 ideas. Which of these would you be interested in working on? And we worked out a contract, and then I wrote a long outline kind of detailing the different things that I wanted to see in May I Enter. And then they took that and they wrote it, right? They didn't write everything that's in the book. They wrote about 90%, 92% of it, right? And I filled in with ideas. I gave them concepts that I was working on, things that I wanted to use as guidelines, as guideposts, to structure the game in a larger sense. So that's kind of the origin story of May I Enter, right? Is I had this idea, I pitched it to Alison, and Alison really dived deeply into it, and really teased out the ideas into the full manuscript that we utilized in the Kickstarter. And it's still on Kickstarter for pre-orders. Got to be another 10 days, 11 days that I have to have pre-orders open. I'm actually going to close those pretty soon, just because I know how many books I'm ordering, and I probably can't order a whole lot more and stay affordable. So if you see this and you're interested in May I Enter, please pre-order now while you still can. Today is going to be a jumbly words sort of day, it seems like. So anyway, I'm going to walk you through the game, the layout of the game as I've designed it, as a way of kind of framing this conversation, right? As we go through the layout, my layout design principle was two things, basically. To try to make sure that no information was on more than a single page spread, right? A page spread is the 2 pages aligned with each other. When you open the book, the left-hand side and the right-hand side, my goal was everything that you had to know about whatever was written on those 2 segments was on those two pages, right? It's not perfect through the book, right? I've done my absolute best to make that true. There's definitely at least 2 places where I know I could not do that, but I kept things aligned so the information was still right there on the next page, right? And that's my design principle throughout this book, is that sometimes I made things a little bit smaller or squished things a tiny bit in a way that I normally wouldn't want to do, because I was trying to make sure that the content was in those 2 spaces, so that when you flipped open a page, you're going to have everything you need about whatever it is you're looking for on those pages, and then references to places later on that might be important, right? The other interesting thing about layout, at least interesting from my perspective, is I designed the borders so that all of the borders are representative of different eras of history, and you start farther back in history, and then as you go along, you get farther and farther along in history, right? So the closer you, the more you go, the closer you get to the modern era. And so the last few parts of the book are that modern era. And I'll show you what I mean. And that's just in the border elements. And that's what this border is here on these edges, right? It's a Sumerian sort of design aesthetic that I don't think these mean anything, but they're numbers or letters, so they could, in theory, mean something. I don't actually remember if I did go through with making it a set of words that say anything, but they are letters of some form in some sort of alphabet. So we're going through the table of contents here. I tried to do the same thing that I mentioned before, right? I tried to make sure that as much as possible, things stayed together on facing pages. That's going to be good for the physical book. It matters a little bit less for the PDF, but when you're opening the PDF, I recommend opening it in 2-page mode. I've set it so it automatically opens in 2-page mode, and I think it makes it certainly reads the way I intended it for it to be designed, and I'm hoping it reads easier for you as you're reading it. And with this table of contents, it's not what I would call perfect. I've tried to define the things that are most essential to have in the table of contents that you would be looking for, and you're like, where is this thing, right? I'm working on the index still, so that's going to be another thing that's going to be helpful. Anyway, so we dive in to Chapter 1, the introduction of May I Enter, and the design. The borders here are designed to be proto-classical Greek in aesthetic, right? These kind of ribbons are actually, they're a Victorian aesthetic design for classical writing, right? You would see these often in things that were about ancient Greek or Latin texts, right? They would have these sorts of things. It's an aesthetic from the Victorian era that I'm like, you know what, I'm going to lean in on that for these borders. The introduction starts with a story about Liz and Adrian. Liz and Adrian. Adrian's a vampire, and he's explaining what it means for him to be a vampire in this world, right? It's 2 pages. It's a pretty short little story, but it sets the essence, the scene for May I Enter as a whole, right? We get into our greater introduction. You get told what is May I Enter, right? You are a vampire. You are bound. These bonds are magical principles. They are bonds that a spell cast by Helen of Troy, the ancient, and Dorje the Bodhisattva did. Maybe some other vampires too. We kind of leave that open for interpretation. They enacted this binding, this ritual, that effectively all the mythological restrictions of vampires are these bindings, right? These are the restrictions that you as a vampire have. And I'll get into those probably as we go along. I will get to the page where they come up and I'll talk about them more there. We talk here, though, about, we give you some basic ideas about what's a role-playing game if you've never played a role-playing game before. We talk about the core concepts of May I Enter, right? These 4 ideas are our core concepts. The sacred covenant, right? Vampires cannot take without consent. They cannot be the abusive sort of monster they are presented in a lot of vampire media. That was our key principle, right? Also, I wanted our vampires to try to make the world a better place, right? Their whole goal in being immortal is to try and make the world a better place. Now, that said, vampires do not agree about what a better world is, per se, right? They are doing their absolute best, but they don't have any greater insight than humans do, right? So what they think a better world is may not be the same between 2 sets of vampires, right? And that's pretty intentional, right? That was a goal for us, is to have vampires disagree about what is best in life, right? And I just made an adjustment on the screen just now to make things easier for me to see, and I lost the chat. So if you're chatting, oh, there it is. Okay, came back. Right. The beast in the shadows is our 3rd core concept, right? Not everything in the world is as conscientious as these vampires that you're playing, there are monsters out there. And these monsters do not have the same principles. These monsters may be humanity, right? Some humans are terrible. These monsters may be other supernatural beings, right? We have fae, we have other monsters that are out there. And your goal, your intent is this balance, right? It's to balance your existence, your hope for humanity with the reality of night-to-night existence. And I think that we've done a really cool job at building that into the gameplay, right? I mentioned some of these things. The world is kind of a slightly darker version of our own world. Humanity's role is complicated, right? And that your intent, your focus as a vampire is to build bonds with humanity. You're building these bonds because they give you access to your powers, and those relationships matter, right? Those are the core memories that you are building that will sustain you throughout your immortal existence. So you'll note that as I was designing this, there are a couple of guidelines on InDesign. Those are helping me know where the bleed lines are, where the cuts are going to be when they produce the book, right? You'll note, and I did this because it was easier for me during layout. The red line is where is the cut lines, right? That is likely where, when they're printing the book, where they're going to cut the pages. It could be anywhere within that space. So I'm going to have to extend white borders to those edges, or I could, to make sure that there's no cuts there. The blue lines are where they might fold the pages, right? So those were the lines that I have tried to stay within to make sure that nothing that we have written, nothing in the borders will get cut off by anything in the production process. I promise you, I probably made a mistake in that, and there will be some issues with that. There always is. It's one of the more frustrating parts of layout, is taking what looks great in a PDF and you get it in real life and it just doesn't work for one reason or another. So there will be adjustments when we get to the physical version of this. Core gameplay elements, right? Mortals, connection to mortals. There are also these primordial vampires. These are vampires that existed prior to the binding ritual done, as I mentioned before. These vampires are just too powerful for that. There was, I haven't mentioned this yet, there was this ancient vampire civilization prior to humanity. At least one of the vampires that is a named NPC in this is the Ancient. The Ancient is so old he doesn't even remember his own name, right? He's old enough that he's not a Homo sapien, right? He is a pre-Homo sapien hominid. He is at least 200 to 300,000 years old. Probably older than that, right? He is an Australopithecus. I think I've said that right. They lived a significantly long period ago, right? So that's an interesting tidbit of the lore, right? Is this, at least one of these vampires is more ancient than Homo sapiens from that evolutionary perspective. So some of these vampires are so ancient, they're so powerful, there's no way that they would be affected by this magic spell. So they just are going to do what they're going to do when they awaken, if they awaken. There's also the Originalists. Originalists are vampires who are bound by the magic, right? But they don't want to be. They want to return to an era when vampires were not bound by that magic. There are also, as I mentioned, other supernatural entities out there. And humans are the main friends and antagonists of the setting, right? Humans are powerful. Humans are capable of a lot. They have a lot more time in the day to do things. It's honestly one of the things that I've thought about the most more recently about the vampire myth is that the biggest struggle for being a vampire is you're stuck in a very short window of the day in most of the world, right? In most of the world, the night is significantly shorter. Humans are still up and about during a large chunk of the night, right? Humans get you know, 18, 19, 20 hours a day if they want, right? Sure, you might not be sleeping well if you're doing that, but you're capable of it. And vampires don't have that opportunity, right? They cannot go out during the day. They have that struggle, that restriction. There are some powers for our vampires that will allow them to go out in parts of the day in a limited fashion, and that is a thing, right? Anyway, so getting into chapter 2 here, you'll see the border has changed. The border here is designed after a Chinese, classical Chinese aesthetic. So that's kind of the idea that we're evoking here. I almost went with an Egyptian motif, and honestly, it was hieroglyphics in the border, and I didn't like it. I didn't like the way that it looked. I can actually show that off real quick, I think. And nope, I'm going to show that border in a minute. Eventually, there it is. So this is the border that I almost went with. Sort of Egyptian aesthetic. And like I said, I didn't like it. Ultimately, I didn't think it worked. So I didn't include it. But I did use this more Chinese aesthetic one that I think works out a little bit better. So anyway, chapter 2 begins with some fiction as well. This is about a vampire talking to their friend Matthew, right? And Matthew is a human that this vampire is telling about what vampire history is like, why they are bound, right? Why they have these restrictions. And you'll note in this fiction, this vampire is not 100% settled on things that we're telling you are truth. We're using a little bit of unreliable narrator throughout the text of this game. You should assume that anything you're being told is not 100% accurate. It is through someone's point of view, through someone else's lens, right? And that honestly is for narrator purposes, for storyteller purposes, for the person running the game's purposes, is that you should have the ability for things to be true for you, right? For you as the person running the game, for the players to be running, but it may not be true table to table, group to group. And that's the intent for us behind an unreliable narrator, is that things will be different in play, and we want you to lean into that, right? Don't be afraid of leaning into things. For us are slightly different, right? We're diving into different elements of this story. But we give you a history, right? We talk about that ancient vampire civilization. We talk about what it's like to be a vampire in the world, what things they remember, what things they're looking for, right? Again, our vampires are mentally healthy-ish, right? We're trying to encourage a positive mental attitude amongst them. So they're not intentionally being monsters, right? They're not descending into monstrousness. They are existing and trying to hold on to the best of themselves in their world. And those are the things they're doing, right? And the world today has all the struggles of the world today. And they are still looking at the future and going, okay, this is the world we have. This is the world we are looking at. How do we continue to try to make the world a better place? And then there are these ruins, these vaults or these bunkers that are buried beneath every major city. And we use the term city a little vaguely. City, of course, means the cities of the world, but it also can mean other places, other locations, right? There are important places where your vampires is what we mean by a city. And these vaults are underneath them. These vaults are representative of the ancient vampire civilization. And these ruins, these vaults that you're exploring, the reason I included them, the reason I encouraged Alison to write them into the game was because I was looking for a little bit of OSR dungeon crawling experience in this, right? I think vampire games do a great job at politics, right? They do a great job at emotional building, about relationship building. Those elements are absolutely front and center in the game, right? but I also, my dog's doing great things. Love that. Um, I wanted to include a little bit of something extra in this as well. That was about exploration. It was looking into something deeper. I wanted there to be moments where players are getting bored with the politics of night to night existence, and they want to explore something different, right? And so literally you can explore these ancient remnants of this civilization, and you can pull out artifacts, right? But you can also learn about yourselves through the balance of existence between these ruins and your day-to-day, your night-to-night existence, right? That's the goal between the vault and between why we included them, right? Is that they're supposed to be an echo of what you're dealing with on the surface. The any inhabitants of them, any like primordial vampires or other monsters that are in there, are supposed to be echoes. They're supposed to be mirrors to what the vampires are dealing with in their day-to-day existence. They're also, and this is pulling a little bit on Castlevania, a little bit on Vampire Hunter D, a little bit on other vampire stories, is they're supposed to be echoes of the fact that sometimes in vampire media, vampires have powers that are clearly technological, right? There was a great Dracula series that was a Victoriana clockwork. There's a word I'm looking for. Steampunky Dracula, right? And that echoes what you see in Castlevania, right? Where Dracula is part of this pre-human civilization with this tons of like magic technology, right? Like why does he have time travel, space travel sorts of abilities? We included that in this, in hinting to those things, because I think that's neat, right? Like, honestly, it was just because I think that's cool. I think it would be interesting if vampires, when they had this civilization, had built some high-tech devices, and you might find them. But what if they also could time travel, right? There's a reference to that on this page where there's a character that finds a cell phone in a locked vault before those cell phones existed, right? There is no way that it could be there at all. Impossible. But it was, and what does that mean, right? There are these little Easter eggy ideas buried in this game that we hope people see, read, and dive into, but you don't have to either, right? You can really take the game as it is given to you and run with that, and that's awesome, right? That's what we're trying to get you to do. So I'll kind of move a little bit forward. I'm about halfway through this live stream, and I'm only at page 40, so lots still to go. We included this segment with this runic border to be about history, right? Specifically about different theories that vampires have about their existence, as well as a timeline. And this timeline includes real events and nonsense, right? There's lots of stuff that's vampire specific that's included here. That's kind of designed in a it's supposed to be a story hook, right? It's a concept with no other information about it that you can use as either a background for your player, like a connection to an NPC. Oh, hey, I was turned into a vampire at the same time as this event was occurring. But like, these are just cool ideas you put together in a timeline that for me have a ton of personal Easter eggs also. There's lots of things in here. There's a reference to my late friend Lisa Elwood in here that I just included for her, right? There's other things in here that are just references to friends and ideas and jokes, right? This 1991 entry should make people laugh for the people who know what it is, and the people that don't will just see, okay, here's some information about a vampire thing that I can use in my story. That's great. Go for that. You'll notice this art is by Katsudon Art. I've really enjoyed working with her. And I think the main choice we made that I want to point out here is we chose to go with black and white line art for all of the interior art of this book. That was an intentional choice. And as we move into chapter 3, we go into an early medieval kind of manuscripty illumination back border. That was the design idea behind this one. I noticed that I'll actually have to move this one over to make sure it stays within the blue lines, but that's kind of what we're going here. And this chapter is talking about how you might play, right? There's an example scenario, the idea of consent as a core principle of the game. We talk about safety mechanics. I think when you're diving into a game that can get as dark as this, you're talking about loss, you're talking about memory, you're talking about mental health. It's good to have these tools talked about, right? You don't have to use them if you have a group that you've been playing with, for 50 years. But sometimes it's helpful to have these when you're playing with people you've played for a long time, because you might not realize that something is bothering one of your players. Maybe it has been bothering them for years, but they keep coming because they want to play that badly, right? I find these tools are just helpful to talk about, helpful for going darker, right? Every time I've used tools like this, I've been able to tell a much more darker story than I would have if I didn't have them, right? It helps me know where the left and right parameters are for me to run things. So continuing on, right? There's that's a kind of a long section about those tools. And then we talk about getting players involved in the game, engaged in how to use the tools that the game is giving you as a player to be a good player in the game. The interesting thing is, like, players who have been playing a long time are like, I don't need this, but it's helpful to have this if you're a new player. It's helpful to have this for reminding you of things that might make your game better, right? We have little things like this bit here, which is a scrap of a letter analysis. Again, it's world building, right? It's talking about something that you can connect to a greater story. You can build this into a greater story. Some great art by Alex Shakeman here on the right, which is based on my friend Dove, including elements that they're important hints for who he is. I'll say it like that in that particular picture. There's also a section here about being a good narrator, right? There's lots of good storyteller, helpful texts out there in the world, DM textbooks out there. We specifically in here are talking about mechanics that make sense for our game, right? How to run May I Enter as a narrator well. That's the intent of this segment. It's because we know that our game does some things differently. And we want you to, as a narrator, think about those things. So we're giving it to you straight up, right? We're telling you, hey, this is a way to engage with this particular book and run this particular game. You'll notice there's a page XX reference here. I have not linked pages yet. That is something that I will do once I get feedback on the PDF from people. That way, yeah, I'm not, if I change a bunch of pages around, or maybe I, even without feedback, decide to change a whole bunch of pages around, I don't have to go in and change all those references quite yet. Have sent this out early to backers, but haven't completely, finalized it yet. So I don't know if I've mentioned 34 minutes into this, but this is a Powered by the Apocalypse game. Powered by the Apocalypse is a mechanical framework, mechanical concept more than a framework, right? It's a mechanical idea, right? It's a theme. It's a mood. It's a genre of its own, right? That exists because Maggie Baker and Vincent Baker wrote Apocalypse World and said to people, "Hey, use our system, right? Use our framework to run your games." And we in the gaming community owe a lot to that first game, right? That game was revolutionary, and I mean that in all senses of the word. It has created change in every game system out there. Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition is influenced by Powered by the Apocalypse. The games like Avatar: The Last Airbender raised $8 million on the back of the system, right, of Powered by the Apocalypse. Sure, the IP is what really got people to the table to back that Kickstarter, but using Powered by the Apocalypse for it is great. It's genius. It's the right system for that game, and I think the bakers deserve all the respect they deserve for creating and letting that system out into the world, letting that framework of creating a game out into the world. Generally, in Powered by the Apocalypse, you have attributes that run from a -4 to +4 scale. That's a thing, actually, that's kind of influenced from Fudge and Fate, and it uses similar things. It uses D6s, 2D6s, as your main dice randomizers. I talked about randomizers in my last live stream a lot. And so the base mechanic for Powered by the Apocalypse, right, is you roll 2d6, and in Apocalypse World, in most Powered by the Apocalypse games, failure is a little bit more common than not failing, right? Failure happens on a 6 or less on those 2 dice, but also partial success is really often, it's driving the narrative forward by saying, yeah, you sort of succeed, but there's a cost to it, right? There's some complication or drawback, some sort of impact to the world that produces more drama. And as I mentioned in the last live stream, randomizers are there to help produce that, right? They help produce specific drama in the story, for good or bad. I'm doing a lot of hand waving. I do a lot of hand waving. If you are bothered by that, I have nothing to say other than it is a thing hopefully you are now aware of. What we did in our version of the base game mechanics is we used moves. Moves are still the type of roll that you would make to do anything in our game, but we included a 12 plus, so there it's possible to roll higher than a 12. It's also possible to roll a 3 or less on the dice for various reasons. And if you do that, you have either a serious success or critical success, or a devastating miss, right? The serious success means that you get extra benefits for rolling the best roll possible. And this is not a mechanic that is in most Powered by the Apocalypse games. I'm not going to say it's not in any, because it might be in others that I'm unaware of. But I've read and played a whole bunch, and this is the first time that I had intentionally was like, I want to see a critical mechanic built into this game, right? Critical success and critical misses should be a factor. They are less likely in a game where you have 2d6, right? Numerically, mathematically, they're a little more unlikely, but when you get them, they're going to feel awesome at the table, right? Or absolutely horrible for your character in that moment if you get a 3 or less, right? So anyway, so we, as this chapter goes on, right, we talk about creating your character. Privileges are the vampire powers, right? They're those things that NPCs, the relationships you build with your NPCs, give you access to these powers, these privileges, right? You start off with I may feed. I may feed is you may feed from that NPC. And it can be blood. We didn't actually ever say this in the rules. We don't actually ever say this in the fiction, as far as I remember. Vampires can absolutely, of course, feed on blood. They have no problem with that, but they might also feed on breath, or they might feed on memories, or they might feed on emotional power, right? Whatever it is they feed on, it has to be from humans, but it doesn't, and it has to be consumptive to some degree, but it doesn't necessarily have to be blood if you want your vampire to feed on any of those other things. It's totally okay. You can absolutely make a Colin Robinson in this game if that's something you're interested in doing. So anyway, you start with I may feed as that first privilege. You have 3 levels of any of these privileges, these powers. And I'll talk about those more in a minute when we get into the various privileges. And then there's this concept of ennui and nostalgia, right? This is the weight of existence. You have nostalgia boxes that you mark off, you unmark off throughout the game. Different powers, mark and unmark nostalgia. And if you get full nostalgia marked off, you get ennui. And ennui is this great, it's more than depression, right? It's a nearly magical sort of like just frustration with everything in the universe, right? And honestly, like, as a person that has dealt with depression in the past, right? Like, ennui is a thing. And it's a thing that we're using because if you're going to live hundreds of years, you're definitely going to experience the weight of history on your shoulders at times. And having that is a thing that you have to contend with as a vampire. That balance between nostalgia, ennui, and positive memories that you're building and that you're calling back to help sustain you. You'll notice again, border is a little bit different in this section, and just trying to go with something that feels like you're progressing through history with that various border. Here's a picture of the Ancient from an era around the American Revolutionary War. This particular book, he's got a copy of I'll remember it in a minute. It doesn't matter. It was written by a French guy about the American society, post-revolution. Definitely an interesting text. That image is based on a copy of the book that I have. I'll eventually remember it. And again, consent, important. There is a mechanic for what we call breaking consent. And then this is when you as a vampire need access to a power you don't have. And you are probably using it for good, right? You're probably reaching in and you're grasping this power because you need it to save someone, right? You need it to, like, in the moment, do something that is incredibly important, powerful, right? That matters. And breaking consent is harmful to you because of the binding, right? You accessing that power is long-term going to destroy you if you keep doing it. But it, in the right moment, is absolutely dramatically something that you should be able to do if it matters. We have deterioration as a mechanic. This is the idea that your connection with these NPCs will reduce for things that you've done just because of time, and because your NPCs are mortal, they will die, right? And I don't say that to be terrible in a stoic way. Like, everything dies, right? The things around us, we are finite beings in a finite world. And deterioration represents the fact of that. You are an immortal vampire in this setting, but things around you deteriorate. And how that affects you will affect your powers, it will affect your personality, it will affect your connection to the world. We also have these resources. This is another thing I've seen in some Powered by the Apocalypse systems, but it makes sense in ours to have two resources: assets and leverage. Assets are money, effectively. They're goods that you can turn into liquid finance, and leverage is your influence on different organizations around the world that you might have built up over time. So Powered by the Apocalypse also uses moves. Moves are these core powers, right? If you do it, you do it, right? Or to do it, you do it, right? This is a core principle of Powered by the Apocalypse. And that means when you're describing a specific thing, you should roll a move, right? To determine if there are any environmental factors that impact your abilities to succeed with it. And alternatively, if you're like, I'd like to roll a move, then you need to describe how that move is actually playing out in the world. So we've got these different moves, act with intent. And again, my goal design-wise was to put one move on one page. If I could have put 2 or 3 moves on every page, I would have done so, but it would have been impossible to read. So I wanted to keep everything together, so I gave each of these moves space to be by themselves, right? So that you could have all the information you need, flipping open those pages and read them without having to flip back and forth to get the full move information, right? That's the whole goal, a whole design principle behind why I chose to use so much white space for these moves, right? And then these are all the regular moves. You also got what we call downtime moves. And now you'll see I really had to work hard to get everything about Deepen a Bond on a single page. But it matters to have it that way so that you don't have to keep flipping back and forth. And so I had to take some design shortcuts to make sure that it's on one page. I had to rewrite sections of Contemplate Eternity. I had to rewrite parts of Deepen a Bond because I did not want it to go over a page. I succeeded. I think it's maybe not perfect in how I would want it to look. I would really prefer it to have a little bit more space. But again, I wanted everyone who was using that move to be able to just go to that single page and read it and not feel like they had to flip pages back and forth. So you've got this also begin or build a project. This was a move that I added near the end of this game. And in the game design process, it represents this idea that vampires are building something, right? That every vampire is trying to change the world, hopefully for the better. And a project represents their active engagement in downtime with that idea. And hopefully that works out. I think in playtesting, it's worked great. So I think it's a great idea. But people will tell us whether it is or not. And this line art by Alex Shakeman on the right represents Helen, the Ancient, and Dorje casting that binding ritual. It's one of the first pieces of art that I got. And I love it. I know that not everybody else will, but I really enjoy it. We've got this Greek-style border for this chapter 5, these privileges. So we're 47 minutes in. I realize I'm not going to get through this entire book, but I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about the bindings, right? The bindings are those things that that ritual caused to occur, and these are the restrictions that our vampires live under. You may not walk freely beneath the sun. You may not cross the living waters. You may not enter unbidden into mortal dwellings. You may not feed unbidden from the living. The symbols and practices of faith are anathema to you. You may not look upon your own reflection, and you may not escape the toll of counting. This last one is my favorite. It's my favorite vampire myth restriction, that if you toss a bunch of grains or seeds in front of a vampire, they have to stop and count every one of them. Count Von Count from Sesame Street is a vampire because of this mythological restriction on vampires, right? I don't think a lot of people realize that. It makes me laugh every time someone goes, "Oh my gosh, really? That's what the count is based on?" It's real. It's true. 100% true. That's why the count counts things, is because of that vampire myth, right? So these are the bindings that you as a vampire have to deal with. And the privileges are powers that allow you in some ways to get around some of those restrictions. Like I may feed allows you to feed. I may walk under the sun allows you to go outside during the sun, right? It gives you extra time in the world. But you have to build up a relationship with an NPC who will give you access to that privilege. And not every vampire is going to have that privilege. And when you, if the relationship you have deteriorates with that NPC, you're going to have to build a relationship with a new NPC to get access to that power. I may travel freely allows you to cross running water, or move, right? It allows you to leave where you have to live because you have to be in the soil of the city where you make your home. And your home in our game means where you have at least one relationship with an NPC that allows you to feed, or where you have first been turned into a vampire. Those are the places where home is. And having this privilege allows you to move freely around that restriction. Otherwise, you're stuck in that physical periphery, that city where you have those relationships built. I may enter as you may enter a person's domain that is normally restricted, right? You can walk into people's houses, things like that. I may see myself. It allows you to actually see yourself in mirrors and your reflection in other things. This is when we get into this page. We get into some that are not explicitly related to the bindings, but they are other powers that you can have access to. Like I may conceal. You can become invisible. Vampires can become invisible in a lot of vampire stories. This represents that, right? I may terrify. Vampires are often horrifying and scary, but this is a magical version of that, right? That you can turn on. I may destroy is super strength. I may worship. Some people were like, well, why would these two things be equivalent to each other? They are story equivalent for lots of reasons, right? I may worship a vampire who is truly faithful is probably going to build this privilege up with any NPC they can get because it matters to them, right? And it also frees you from being harmed by holy symbols and holy ground and things like that. I may transform, allows you to become animals, bats, etc., mist, things like that vampires can do. I may restore allows you to heal others. There's a move that allows you to heal yourself, but I may restore allows you to heal others. Now, you'll notice most pages I got 3 privileges per page. Not all of them. A couple of them I had to adjust the way the spacing was to make sure that they could fit. I may pursue as speed. I may soar as flight. I may perceive as heightened supernatural vision. This art on the right was done by a great Nigerian artist who I worked with, and I believe it's INSEAC. And they did a amazing job with this particular art. And this is an in-joke. I'm not going to explain the in-joke, but this is a joke that I laugh like crazy about whenever I see this particular piece, because it is funny to me. Eventually, I'll tell people that story. You'll notice here, again, only 2 privileges on this section, because layout-wise, it made the most sense to only have those 2 there. And then we get into things describing feed tokens being the representative of the blood or other energy that you're spending to use those privileges in play. They give you, when you use them, they either give you narrative adjustments that you make to your character, or they give you benefits to your roles. They actually always do both, right? If you're using a move with a privilege, you're using something that privilege is giving you the extra ability to use, right? This section includes a slate that I wrote in cuneiform. It's not in Sumerian. If you ever can figure this out, I applaud you. I actually think it's mostly nonsense, but it's what it says here in English is what this says effectively using cuneiform font. So no secrets there, really. I just know that it's probably not actually accurate in any sort of way. Chapter 6, we're getting to the end of this live stream today. Chapter 6 is your playbooks. Playbooks are a core design of Powered by the Apocalypse, right? A playbook is your character class. It's your general idea behind your character, right? For our game, it's the vampire genre that you are referencing. The Archivist is your Rudolph Van Richten, right? It's your Beckett from Vampire the Masquerade. Your Archivist is the Arcanum from Vampire and the World of Darkness. And I'm trying to remember the name from Anne Rice's book, but the Watchers that are in Anne Rice's universe, right? They are the Archivists, right? The Creep is your Nosferatu, right? The Kid is the Kid is your rebellious vampire from the Rebellious Vampire movie that my brain's not letting me come up with right now. The Riz, this is an interesting one because people have said, oh, well, why choose a phrase that's going to immediately date your game? I kind of love that. I would kind of love it in 20 years if someone were to pick up this game and go, what does this mean? Right? I'm okay with that. I'm okay with those moments in time, because I feel like our game is about moments in time. So using a thing like the Riz to reference, your Lestat, your Louis from the Vampire Chronicles, right, from Anne Rice's books, that is awesome to me. The Shiner is a reference to Twilight, but the Shiner isn't a Twilight vampire, except that they are tortured inside, right? So again, lots of vampire myth plays on that. And the vamp is Dracula, right? They are ancient, they might be 20 years old, right? Ancient in this case is they have that sort of elegant and that drastic connection to history, right? Often they are ancient in a time frame as well, but it's the genre that they're supposed to evoke, really, that's important. In this section, we talk about building your relationships with your NPCs and things like that. Again, some art from Katsudan Art here. And we talk about the specific playbooks. The playbooks each get their own specific playbook privilege, and they get their own special moves as well that each of the playbooks can use. So they get 2 moves. They get 1 privilege that they can use that's special to them, which allows them to have some distinctiveness from other characters in the game. And people can play all of the same playbook and still do different things, right? But it's good to use them as kind of like a baseline. The art here on the right is actually some stock art that I used. I used a small amount of stock art in this game, about 4 or 5 pieces, just because I thought I was going a little bit too long without using art, because we only had a limited amount of art budget, and I didn't want to break the bank, right? So I used some stock art to add to this, and I use the stock art here in the playbook section. And I personally think each of these pieces of stock art is perfect for the various playbooks. This is not stock art. This is Alex Shakeman's art that I had him do, but I think, again, it fits perfect with that particular playbook. And so this is stock art on this particular page, and lots of cool information about the various playbooks that are in here. And I'm rolling through them quickly because I know I'm getting to the end of the hour, and I wanted to show off at least a couple more things. So I'm probably going to go over. Probably going to go over my hour just to get to the end of the book. Chapter 8 is about the city, right? It's about building a city. And we create an example version of a city. I've included some random tables. I love random tables. I'm a random table person. I have books. I love books that are completely random tables, right? I also, as a layout person, hate tables. Hate in design for building tables, and I don't know why I hate myself by having made a bunch of tables. But we did. I think the tables look great. I think the concept of the tables for helping you build a random city is a great idea. It's useful. We created a whole segment about building the ruins, those vaults underneath the cities as well. And then we provided a example city, right? There's lots of information here, both about creating rural and like city locations. And then we have a section in here, I will get to it eventually, that's about our sample city. We've got information about building various NPCs. We've got a few sample, through a few in-world letters that are in here that I think are fun. Again, they're unreliable narrator, little bits of information. And we use Santa Monica. I will let you laugh about why. We use Santa Monica as our reference city, our example city. That has all the information you're going to need in here to see an example of how we built a city, right? And we encourage you to use that city or build your own with the tools in the toolbox that we provided. We also provide a whole bunch of relics. These are items that are probably in the vaults that you're going to uncover. And these relics are magic items, right? But they're magic items that fit the theme of our game, and that give you examples to work from for building your own. We also have this fairly robust antagonist section, right? We start with telling you how we think building good antagonists in our system would work, right? How to do so, what elements to add to them, how to bring them into a game and keep them coming back so the players enjoy interacting with those NPCs from those antagonists, right? The power of catharsis in the game, right? Catharsis is a thing. You're trying to get people to feel some sort of emotional release in character at the very least. And if you can get your players there in a safe way, I think that's fantastic, right? That's a thing you should be encouraging if your players are comfortable with it, right? We talk about the balance between catharsis and trauma, right? And how you can have catharsis without causing trauma. There's lots of ways to do that. We have these three categories of antagonists: mortals, vampires, and other supernatural beings. I will note, for those who might know me from Werewolf the podcast, I explicitly said we would not have werewolves in this setting. That's partly because I'm just not ready to engage with werewolf media yet. I might be eventually, but they currently do not exist in May I Enter. They probably will not ever exist in May I Enter. And that's just me intentionally saying, in this particular world, that is one supernatural being that I'm not including. Other people, of course, please make them, add them into your game if you want to. But I explicitly said, let's not include them in this, right? Our antagonists come in three different types: minor, significant, and major, right? Your minor antagonists might be on screen for all of 10 seconds. Your significant ones are probably a short story arc, and your major antagonists are the Master from Buffy, right? A whole season. Or they're Spike and Drusilla. You've got almost 2 seasons of Spike as an antagonist, right? Those are major antagonists who keep coming back, keep being a thorn in your sides, keep being frustrating, right? We also have information. We have these rules on these mechanics that we've devised that include narrator moves, right? Narrator moves in most Powered by the Apocalypse systems do not use any dice. We included dice as kind of a semi-optional rule. You can either use your violation pool, violation being the resource that you have as a narrator. You can either use that pool to do specific actions as an antagonist, or you can roll dice if your antagonists are out of violation in their violation pool, or if you just want to add some randomness into the possibility of the impact of those moves on players. We have these conditions. Conditions are harm, right? They're wounds that characters take that apply to antagonists as much as they do players' characters, depending on the type of condition that we're talking about. So we've got sample narrators as well as these moves. We got a bunch of different moves that apply to the various types of antagonists. And then we've got these sample mortal antagonist groups. There are 3 of them. We've got 3 samples for our vampire antagonists. We've got 3 samples for our supernatural antagonists as well. We wanted to include a few options that, again, these could exist in your world or not, right? From a unreliable narrator perspective, these things may or may not be in the game. But I've run, every version of the playtest that I've run has included the Emerald Court as this opposition to my vampires. That was a supernatural group that I kind of glommed onto, that I thought this would be a good one for me to use regularly. There are a few different options in there that I think are great, that I encourage you to look at. Chapter 9 is about our conditions. There's lots of information about the conditions. Again, you'll notice I tried to include just the right amount of information in this section about different things. And I did a lot of balancing to make sure things fit into these Art Deco style borders. We're getting closer to the modern world, right? So this information is here. We've got clocks. I stole these both from Blades in the Dark and from Apocalypse World itself, but also I stole them from Cowboy Bebop, the RPG. The way they run in Cowboy Bebop is a little bit closer to how we run them. sort of close to how they are in Blades in the Dark too. There's overlap, and I'm definitely giving credit to Blades for really like popularizing this idea. But I have played it most so far with the Cowboy Bebop RPG, so that's where we pulled that from. We get into our narrator moves. We talk about things like character progression, right? Our status conditions. This is a long segment where, again, I had to do a lot of finagling to make sure things fit. And I wasn't putting a single condition onto the next page at all. And then we talk about this is a little Easter egg, right? In first edition Vampire the Masquerade, there was a tiny, tiny paragraph that referenced vampires potentially becoming human again. And I wanted to include that same little possibility of an idea in our game. And we called it Reawakening the Sun's Love. It's just this tiny possibility that humans could become mortal again. And that's all you need, right? As a narrator, if you want to run that plot, you've got the idea, right? The idea exists in the world for you to use if you want to, right? You don't have to. It may go the way of a vampire and never show up in another book ever again. But I think it should be there, right? I think it's a thing in vampire movies, in the vampire genre. So let it be. Let it exist, right? As we get into this final appendix, I've been rambling for a little over an hour, almost an hour and 10 minutes. But I really wanted to show off this last segment. This is our named NPCs, right? These are all characters that we've created based on different genre ideas that we wanted to include, right? But also we wanted to get a people from a width and breadth of history and the world and include them in the game, right? Include them in the narrative. So you've got Helen of Troy, right? Helen of Troy, to me, it's both a reference to other media, but it's also it's empowering Helen, right? To say she's not just a pretty face, right? She is a magical, powerful force in the world. And what if she was that magical and powerful force? We've got information about the Ancient, who I've talked about before. And the Ancient, to me, is just... he is one of the more interesting, but also he's slightly ridiculous, right? He's slightly a ridiculous figure, and for me, I love that, right? That is the type of NPC that I love including in things. But we've got a mix of different characters in here for good or bad, and some of them are references to other media. Some of them are references to people I know, but they're all in there because I think they represent something cool or interesting about vampires and about the possibilities that May I Enter offers to the genre. So that's it. It's a lot. I've been talking for a good chunk of time. I hope people enjoy this discussion about May I Enter and how it was built, the goals behind it. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments or send me a message. I'm happy to talk about May I Enter, of course. Like I said, it is currently on Kickstarter still for pre-order. So if you are interested in pre-ordering it, go on there and do so. That's going to close down in a week or so. And I'm umming a lot, so I think this is a good time to end it. And thank you very much. Should be back tomorrow. I'm not 100% sure what tomorrow's live stream will be. Should be at 12 noon Eastern time. And that is, of course, if the shutdown ends, I will not be on here. But I will try to be on around noon every day until that happens. So you will probably see a couple more of these from me as we wait for that to happen. So I hope you have a wonderful day. And again, drop a message, subscribe, like, etc. All those things, super helpful. So thanks very much.